I was driving back on my own and I just started crying. And I was like, what's happening? Where is this coming from? And I think my heart and my body were just like, can we stop now? Can we take a break? We've been going for years, and we've also been taking care of everyone for years. Is it our turn?
Hola, you are listening to First Gen Healing, a podcast on Latinx healing and awakening journeys. My name is Priscila Luna. I am your host, your intuitive prima, and I'm so excited to introduce to you guys today's guest, Victoria, aka the First Gen Feeler. Yay!
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and for being up for sharing your story. I would love to hear a little bit about your upbringing, and then we can go from there.
I am from the lovely town of Fresno, California. I was born and raised, and I always call it the jewel of the valley. Now, I have such a love for Fresno. I know not everybody feels that way, but I just love and appreciate it because I always say that people are my landmarks, and I just have such good people here. I have my family, and so I really appreciate it. And I lived in SF for 6 years when I went to school and when I was working. So I also appreciate the parking that there is in the Central Valley.
The space,
where I'm just like, I don't have to worry about my car. Make it, if you're in LA or if you're in SF, that you're just like, let me read all the 1,000 signs. But yeah, I was raised here. My parents are both from Mexico. My mom is from Guadalajara. My dad's from Guanajuato. And they both came over when they were when they were kids or teens, and they met over here. And I'm one of 4 kids. Ooh, the fourth one. He's going to listen to this. He's going to be like, excuse me. I was the last one for 9 whole years. So there's that. But yeah, I'm the third out of 4 kids. I was raised in a traditional Mexican Catholic household. And a lot of those tradition and value I hold dear to my heart. Actually, part of the inspiration for First Gen Feeler is also that our culture and traditions are so beautiful, but if we don't do the inner healing work, we can't keep the parts that we want. We get to look and see the things that no longer serve us, or that are unhealthy. That's also why in my First Gen Feeler definition, I am very clear in saying unhealthy patterns, because we're not trying to get rid of all the patterns. We're just trying to see what's no longer serving us. But yeah, I was raised here, and my parents divorced when I was about 9 years old. And so that was interesting, being in a Mexican Catholic community, when, divorce isn't really something that people are for in either of those communities. And so it was really interesting for me growing up, people telling me all the time, oh my gosh, ay, mija, I'm so sorry. And I just remember thinking, you know what, why are you sorry? That was a really good thing. And, it's a different experience for everyone. But I was just very blessed with, again, community, who was just my family. I have a large family here. And so it was nice to have that support, and to know that wouldn't be something that defined me. But growing up, I just always remember thinking or people would tell me, they're like, oh, you don't seem like a divorced kid. And I was like, well, I've never been divorced. I don't know. But yeah, so it's just interesting with also having with that happening, parentified themes. I ended up with my little brother and getting to play a role in his life, as did my older siblings, just because, it's our parents' first time living too, and everybody has their own inner healing and that they're also working on, which, now as an adult, it's just wild to me to think oh my gosh, you were my age with all these kids and trying to figure things out, and so I grew up here, went to high school, and then went away for college, which was a shift for me because I'd always seen my identity within my family. I go around town, or I introduce myself, growing up in my bubble and saying, oh, soy la hija de, And they were like, oh, okay, you come from a good family. I didn't have that in San Francisco. And so it was like really cool and scary, all of the feelings, to find my own identity there, and also see if my beliefs were my beliefs, or if they were the beliefs that I was given, and what I wanted to do with that. But yeah, that's my like upbringing and into, I think, the next part of my journey.
I love that you mentioned certain things that stand out. For example, is you had a big family, all within Fresno. Would you say that many of them lived there?
Yeah, I have, tias and cousins.
Okay. Yeah. And then the second thing is like that you understood it as a positive thing that your parents got divorced. Yeah. Do you feel like you saw that from a young age, or now looking back, you see it as a positive?
Oh, I saw it from a young age. My parents are very much happier and better people in their, like, apart. And so I think that that's beautiful to recognize too. And I'm grateful that my siblings and I recognize that. And looking back, especially like the beginning of my career, I was a children's therapist, and now I work with inner children is what I say, because I work primarily with adults now in my private practice. But to be a child and know, ooh, these people are not a good fit, there's grief there and there's sadness there. But also there's relief when knowing, like, oh, that's what it is. It's not me. Because that's how I know a lot of people also come out of those situations. They're thinking, if I had done something differently, I never once thought. I don't think any of my siblings and I thought were like, is it us? We're like, no, they just don't fit. And that's okay.
Okay. And then when they divorced, did both your parents stay in Fresno?
Yeah, they both stayed in Fresno, and they're both still unmarried, actually.
I think I asked because, like, what stood out to me is then when you mentioned, like, moving to San Francisco was your first instance of not feeling like, oh, everyone kind of gets an idea of who I am.
But also the fears that creep in that I feel like a lot of first gen have. And the one that always sticks with me is like, pero qué van a pensar, los demás? What is everybody going to think? And so that was in the back of my head too, in my college experience. Not that I was not going wild, girl. I was not. I was
You
sleeping.
Weren't? Okay.
I was sleeping. I was tired. I stay tired. But I was up there, and I was just very serious about, like, I was like, I'm going to do what I got to do. And I was very, like, set on doing that for myself. And I wanted to take the most units I could, because you better believe I'm going to take full advantage of, like, the financial aid that I was getting. And I was like, if I can take 18 units, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make it work.
Wow.
Which was like, like, I don't even know. I don't know if I could make it through school now, but that was an experience too, because I was taking on a lot. I had like 1 major and 2 minors, and I was like working an internship. So it was like, I wanted to do all the things and get the bang out of my buck. That's what I was like, if I'm here, this is what I'm doing. But it was really through, like, relational connections that I ended up being able to cultivate a really healthy friend group, and also a nice testing group, I think, of learning about boundaries, learning about how to have hard conversations. With my friend group, who I actually met in a first gen program. So it was a summer program 2 weeks before school started. And they had told us, all right, all of you are first gen, and you're probably going to be friends forever. And we laughed. I laughed because I wasn't intending on making friends. I was like, I'm just here to do school. Okay. And I ended up meeting, like, some of my best friends there, and we're still very close to this day. And so I was just very fortunate, because we all got to connect with a lot of the things that were similar, which was the guilt and shame of what it is to be first gen, but also some of the joys of the tradition. And so we got to explore our identities together in that way and see, okay, who am I, and what are the pieces that I wear, And so I just feel very fortunate that I had that group, because figuring out boundaries in as first gen is really hard, because if you're trying to introduce something new to your family, you're the one shaking things up. You're low key, like the black sheep. And it's like, ay, mira esta, like bien americana. And I'm like, no, that's not what it is.
Se cree mucho.
Yeah, mira, like she went away and this is what she's bringing. And that's not what it was. It was that when we learn differently, we do differently. And boundaries, and I talk about this on my page and I talk about it a lot in my work. It's that boundaries are not barriers. Boundaries are meant to keep people in, not keep people out. And so boundaries are also you recognizing your own things and having that ownership as well. And so that's the journey forever for all of us, which is like, oh, okay, this is where I need to own up to my side of this.
Yeah, it's like you're testing what does it mean to individuate, to set some, like you said, it's boundaries, not barriers, right?
Yeah.
So like, what does that feel like? Because I call it like a delicate dance that you're always dancing between like empathy and the love and they did sacrifice, but then also this is my life. Like it's a delicate dance that you dance constantly of, am I pushing too hard? Am I asking for too much? Is it me? Is it them? And you kind of go back and forth.
There's a lot of grief in it, but there's also, like I said, a lot of joys. And that's also what I try to bring to my page. Because I feel like in my own journey, there would be moments where I think I would be angry because I had certain expectations of like, oh, this is how a parent should show up, or this is how families should be, right? I'm seeing this around me and everybody's different is what, I've learned, but tying my happiness to expectations, that's the part where I was like, oh, that's just signing yourself to be disappointed forever, because sometimes life has a way of surprising you with even better things. And so if I'm just like, no, it has to be this exact way, I'm not leaving room for life to be beautiful, because life is so much more than I concoct in here. Right.
Right. Yeah. And I think what I have noticed is that because we're first gen, like we had to in some way survive in that way, like figure things out, and we had to create a plan and go after it. But then we get to like rewrite that programming, let's say, for ourselves, in the sense of like allowing and like you said, being open to life surprises. But I do want to ask you before we move forward, this podcast is on healing and awakening.
Yeah.
So which of those journeys resonates most with you? And then when do you feel like was kind of like the first instance when you realized you were healing or you were awakening?
I would say that it was when I was done with grad school. Like, I think that there were little bits and pieces, but it wasn't like the full, like, waterfall of awakening and stepping into healing until I was done with grad school.
Okay, interesting. And yeah, I think a lot of people are going to resonate just because I talked to a lot of first gens that's kind of like you stay in school, and so it keeps you in a certain mode or a certain channel of life, right? Like I'm the student, I am always busy with school. I think when you graduate, it's like a next version of you, I don't know if that's what happened to you. How was that experience for you?
I think for me, it was the realization that, and I remember because to get my degree, my master's degree, I had to do a year interning. And so I was interning at a county and I was loving it. Ended up working 4 more years there. And it was just such a good experience for just learning and growing. I had fantastic mentors. And I remember coming towards this finish line and realizing, or really asking myself, like, wait, what am I rushing towards? And I think in that moment is when like my little existential crisis started happening, because, we're taught growing up, like just educate, like get educated. Like that's why we're here. Right. And I remember hearing my dad say that. My dad was just very encouraging of that. My mom was like, start a business, do this, do whatever. Just like, you can make your life whatever you want, and I felt like I was only given the roadmap up until this point. And so it was also really scary for me to be like, okay, I got my degree, I got it. And what do I do now? And I think that's where I started to like really get into like, oh, I'm turning inwards now. And that's scary because I've done so much of my life pointing outwards. And I remember like my best friend was getting married. So I was also driving up and down to SF. And I was like on one of my drives back, I think when finally all of the rush of like graduation and the wedding season and all of the things were done, I was driving back on my own and I just started crying. And I was like, what's happening? Where is this coming from? And I think my heart and my body were just like, can we stop now? Can we take a break? We've been going for years and we've also been taking care of everyone for years. Is it our turn? And so that's really when I started to do a lot more inner work and exploring the time when my parents divorced and the different roles of children in a family and saying, oh, wow, I saw my brother as a protector and I think I've been angry with him for some years because I don't think he was there to protect me from this. And recognizing the facts that I think a lot of us know as first gen, where it's like, oh, my older sister is basically my mom, because, my mom's got things to do. But it's all of those pieces and seeing where I was in my relationship with my younger brother as well, and starting to do that inner work to see, do I want to be in this parentified role, or do I want to have fun being a sister? Do I want to have fun being an older sister? So it was just like all of this stuff at once. And yeah.
So you felt it, as you said, a waterfall. I love that like vision, because I do think sometimes it feels like so much is coming down. You wake up to it and then it's like, oh, I can see all of these things, these dynamics, these factors. For so long, sometimes we carry it, but we don't see an option out of it maybe, or we don't even stop and pause to like question it. Do you feel like at that time, it was your education that helped you navigate that waterfall? Was it you got support? Did you go to a therapist? What was your approach like to start navigating what you were sensing?
When the waterfall hit, I leaned into my connections. I had fantastic mentors in my internship, and one of my mentors is still a very good friend to this day. And so I was able to come to them and say, hey, all of this stuff just hit me. What do I do? And they just said, well, you take it one bite at a time. Like, that's what you do, and this is sort of it for the rest of your life. But, they encourage therapy and also just finding safe spaces and also turning inward and being okay with that. Because at the time, I think the way a lot of us are raised is that, we're always doing things for others, even at the expense of ourselves. And so when I really looked inwards, I was seeing I was doing a ton for others, but I wasn't allowing myself to accept anything from anyone else. And that was also leading to like even feelings of resentment. And that wasn't anybody's fault. It was just like, I was raised this way, right? But I didn't know how to communicate or even to accept, right? If you've ever had like the whole like the struggle of somebody trying to pay somebody back, like in a family, you're like, here's the money. No. Here's the money. No. Right. It felt like that, where I was just always saying like, no, it's fine. And here I am getting into emotional debt, right? Because I don't know how to ask for help or how to receive that help. But yeah, so it was leaning into my safe emotional connections. I did do therapy because grad school requires it. So I actually had to go to therapy in grad school because they require a certain amount of hours in order to be part of the program. And I really like that because it's like, you got to practice what you preach. You got to go into this. So that was a great starting point. And I also really leaned into what is now I'm recognizing as a lot of inner child work. Because that was the advice I got. They said, lean into your joys, like lean into what is bringing you happiness and really nurturing that inner child, right? And so for me, that was music. I am a musician and a songwriter as well. So that's like something I do like on the side just as like a hobby. But I got to lean into that and do like just fun projects with myself and fall in love with making music playlists again and going to music events. And then also spending time with my nephews, like my cousin's kid. And that was just really bringing me joy and connection. Also, like I said, that group that I had from college, all first gen, we all happened to be like sort of going through same things where we're like, we got our degrees. Like, what do we do now? No, you know, the map is done. So that was also beautiful for all of us to connect and sort of see each other and say, oh, this is where I'm at on my my journey. Where are you? But we also all understood later on, because I really just like disconnected from a lot of things just so I could spend time with me. In my work now, I will say over and over and over again, the longest relationship that you have is between you and you. And how is that trust? You know, because things will happen, things will go wrong, things will go right. But at the end of the day, when something happens, we want to be able to say, I see that. And you know what? I know that we can handle it together, or I'm going to take care of you. And how beautiful is it to hear that from other people? And how beautiful is it also to hear it from yourself and know that you mean it and know that it's true.
Yeah. It's like knowing that you have your own back. And I think like when we grow up helping others and kind of attuning to others' needs, I think that the self-trust or like our value, our worthiness is based on who we are for others. And so it's like rewriting that story of like, who are we for us? You know, like do I show up for me? Do I know what I need? Am I willing to give myself that? But I think like in that transition or transformation, sometimes a lot of feelings of maybe fear or doubt come up and bubble up, right? Like, what does this mean if I stop giving that energy to those people that I love? Did you experience that? And if yeah, like, how did you navigate it? You know, because it's a big change to go from one way of being to another.
Yeah, it didn't happen overnight. So there's that. I think there's always the fear of, are they still going to love me? Right. And that's a big thing. And I truly believe that in my own journey that happened, and it was a blessing to be able to deal with things that I needed to in adulthood, like further adulthood. You know, the fears, they come, but it really does come back to, what are my truths? What are also the facts here? And who do I have in my corner? It might not be everybody who you would hope. And I know that during that time, it was almost like I describe it as pruning of my life, because I was also recognizing a lot of friendships that were very one way. And I think I had been told that for years by some friends. They're like, oh, I don't understand this friendship. And, you know, I think we've all had those friendships, right? But you're just like, oh, they're a good time. Like it's fine. It's not that serious, whatever. But yeah, so being okay with that change. And, you know, I don't have a green thumb, but I always use this example of, you know, we see how the plantitas need to grow, and sometimes we got to prune in order for it to bloom. And it's the same with us in our lives, and knowing, okay, what are the things that are grounding me? And the things that were grounding me are that I'm doing the work. I'm moving forward. It might not be at the pace I want, but also that I do have people in my corner. Even if it was just like, if I felt like it was one or two, I'm like, okay, I got this. And that's what I'm going to cling to. So those are the things that I was able to use as supports, and also finding safety within my body. That was the other thing. I would go to a dancing class, or I would go to like an exercise class. I was doing a lot of exercise classes at the time. But in all of this, it was just, again, this isn't an overnight thing. It was time. It was years of healing back layers. You're like, oh, that's under there. Okay. But as you continue this journey, you collect different tools so that you can deal with the next level. It's like life's a video game. You're just getting ready for the next level, and you learn what you need to learn on this level before you go to the next one.
I wonder if it, because you have the education of like a therapist, you understood to lean into the people that were supporting you. You understood that that was okay. I think like some of us who are navigating a little bit more blindly, it's like, oh, like having the arguments with certain people that you really love and thinking like, oh my God, you know, it's devastating. It's like, I would think, I don't know, with my family, for example, I think when I finally found my voice, I thought that I was happy to share it, you know? And when I started to speak louder, it was rejected. It was like there was a pushback or it was disrespectful. I'm doing air quotes here, but you know, it was just like a whoa, like what's happening? And I think like you say, like it's part of the tools that you gain because that rejection shows you, like separates you from this enmeshment. But I do think like, yeah, as you're navigating it, it could feel like so much, right? Like,
And can I just say, being educated in this field doesn't exempt me from having regular family or having feelings, right?
Yeah.
You know, we can rationally know this is what boundaries are. This is what I need, or what my mom said is not okay, right? But that doesn't save me from what's going on in here, especially if I haven't created a safe space within myself. So the turmoil of speaking up, the turmoil of being different, handling things different. Yeah, I was right there with you, girl. I was right there with you crying. And I'm just like, I don't understand. Like, also sometimes it felt like a little bit of a curse. It does.
Yeah.
Like to be like, if I didn't know any differently, like, or if I didn't want any differently, you know, sometimes I think when I was younger, I would wish that I wouldn't want to do things differently. And I know that that's a common tale for a lot of people, and saying like even just parts of themselves. I mentioned to you earlier that I enjoy music. And for the longest time, I wouldn't say anything to my dad about anything that I had going on with music. If I had a performance, if I had this, if I had that, because he would be so uncomfortable with it. And he's like, ¿por qué vas a hacer eso? Like, why? People are going to judge you, right? And it wasn't till like lots of like inner work, and I think the waterfall happening, where I was like, oh, those are his things. Those aren't my things. And that's the way that he's also trying to show love. It's trying to protect me, but also you can't protect people from experiencing life. It's going to happen, you know? And maybe people did like my stuff. Maybe they didn't. But the point was, I was having a good time, right? But he didn't see that because he wasn't given those tools. And I feel like also a lot of our parents who are immigrants as well, what are we taught? I just got to keep my head down, do my work. No one's going to bother me. That's what's safe for me. So, you know, after a lot of my inner work, recognizing, oh, you're just trying to protect me. And you think that if I speak up, if I'm loud, that I'm going to get in trouble or I'm going to get hurt. Right. And now, you know, fast forward, my dad, while he still is uncomfortable with how I'm loud in some ways, he's just like, muy bien, mija. Like, that's good. I'm glad you can do that. I can't do that. Right. But that's taken years, and it's not something that happens overnight. It's a dance with everybody. And we're all learning how to do things differently. And especially in adulthood, right? The longest relationship you're also going to have with everybody else is adulthood. So how am I navigating my relationship with my parents? How am I navigating my relationship with my siblings? Because a lot of us also are leaning on, oh, well, when we were younger, we were so close. We did this, we did that, or this is how things went. But now life is different because we all have bills to pay. We have work. We have maybe spouses. Life just gets busier. So,
it expands. That's so true. I mean, and so real, that feeling of like, I wish I could just not like even feel this or know this or have this awareness, right? I think that's worth like highlighting too for people that are listening. It's normal to feel like, oh, it feels like their life is easier because they just don't even care about it. You know, they don't speak up. They're still living in old dynamics. And sometimes I think we wish we could exist within them and not stand out or not feel other than. So I just want to highlight that for anyone that's listening. If you're feeling that, know that I think, part of the process. It's part of understanding. And it's like, oh, I just wish I could turn this version of me off, my sensitivity off, and just go with the flow maybe, or go back to how things were.
And finding your community, because even the people who we love and care about, they could not see it the way you see it. And that's also why I specifically had like first gen feeler. It's because I was having this conversation with a lot of friends and colleagues, and we were all having the same conversation about like, I feel like some people don't understand, and they don't. You know, in our world, I'm like, it's a big deal that I told my mom, like, I'm not available at 1:30, but I can do 2:30, right? She's like, okay, like, you know, like that's not something that we're used to doing without shame, right? And in other families, they're like, okay, well, that's okay. What's the big deal?
Like what's the or sometimes like your own, like for example, my younger sister, she'd be like, okay, like that's not a big deal that you spoke of, because you know she's been speaking up since she was a lot younger. But I do want to bring us back to inner child healing, because I know that can feel like a foreign subject if you've never heard about it. And I know like when I first started doing inner child healing, it felt so weird to think like, what do you mean? Is there an inner child inside me? Like, what does that mean? And I'm supposed to communicate, and it's not necessarily my feelings, it's my inner niña's feelings. So I would love if you could maybe walk us through a little bit of what that experience was like for you, or how it evolved for you, you know, and if you also experienced it being foreign, and how you leaned into that.
Yeah. You know, I just made a post, I think yesterday, but it was like, oh, do you think of me? You know, do you think of me now? And adult me being like every day. And that made me emotional, like doing it. Think about her a lot more now. And I think that that's just so loving. And breaking it down. And again, I credit the fantastic mentors I had in like the beginning of my career, and really just getting educated on how the brain works and how the nervous system works, so that I knew I wasn't crazy. This is how my body was built. This is how my nervous system was built from all the way back here. It makes sense that my nervous system is trying to keep me safe. And I do go over all of that in my inner child healing workshop. But, you know, essentially between the ages of 0 and 7 is when your nervous system is really building how it's going to be in the world to feel safe. And I think we know that rationally, but sometimes we're just like, okay, yeah, I get it. How it was when I was a kid affects how I am now. I get it. But do you, right? Because we carry these things even if we are in a different situation. And so there is a lot of rewiring that needs to happen up here and also in here to feel connected in our bodies. Because I think anybody who's ever had a panic attack or felt anxious or depressed knows you can tell me to feel happy, but it doesn't click in like that. I have to be mind and body connected. My body has to feel safe. That means my nervous system has to feel safe. So learning about the nervous system, learning how these childhood experiences are really where I'm going back to, right? The way that my boss talks to me, if they talk to me in a certain way, maybe that transports me back to, oh, that's how my mom would reprimand me, or that's how my mom would talk to me. Oh, I don't like that. But if I'm not connected with myself and I don't know these things, I'm thinking, oh, my boss is just like annoying. Even though my boss could not be annoying, it could be my inner child is going through a lot and is, you know, I'm reacting to protect myself. Right?
You're triggered,
or something,
essentially.
Yeah, that you're triggered. But I also, one of the tools or the reflections that really helps me in adulthood is recognizing how other people are just different. And it doesn't mean that it's on me, right? Because especially I'm a recovering people pleaser and overachiever. So, you know, growing up, you know, my parents, they were not the happiest in their marriage. What did I learn how to do? I learned how to perform. I learned how to make everyone happy, keep everyone comfortable. And, you know, I had it, and I credit I credit that to my humor now and a lot of my performance skills. But, you know, coming from that and into adulthood, knowing that, you know, in my marriage, not letting it affect that, because I remember when things were tense when I was young, or when things were quiet, I would perceive that as things are tense. So I need to tiptoe. I need to be smiling. I need to do all these things, right? Fast forward to married me. My husband's just a quiet guy. He's just a quiet dude. He's not unhappy. He's just chill. And I think that's also why I gravitated towards him, because I was like, ooh, I like that spirit. Like, this is nice. And so I remember, like, when we had first started dating, I'm like, I'm pretty sure you're not, but I'm going to ask. You're not mad, right? Like, you've been quiet. And he goes, oh no, I'm just enjoying your company. And I'm just like, oh, okay, cool. Same. He's just like, okay. But, you know, that's all inner child work, where I'm recognizing this is a different experience than this. And I'm getting to create new experiences for my brain and for my nervous system, so that I have more of those drops in the bucket. So that becomes my new norm of like, oh, when people are quiet, they might just be chilling. Like, they just might be on their own. As opposed to what I grew up with, which is shit's about to go down. Yeah. So, I don't know.
You know, I have the similar but opposite experience, where it's like when like doors are being slammed, or like the putting away the dishes and stuff like that noise. When I was doing inner child work, I recognized that when I would hear that, in my mind, it's like, oh, they're expecting me to come out and help. Otherwise they're angry, you know, they're gonna be angry. So it would bug me when there was loud noises, like when family would sleep over. Not bug me, but it would trigger me. There we go. Like, in the sense that I would be like, they would wake up earlier than me. And so it was my own nervous system activating and saying, like, they're going to be angry if I don't come down, but I'm still sleepy. And so what I loved in your example is that you couple it now with communication, right? Which is something I think also is part of your toolbox now, and it's not always a part of ours. Like, we have to build towards that, where it's like, oh, I could just ask, I don't have to assume, you know, but that can feel scary, I imagine, and we have to build up to that too.
Yeah, but that also took, you know, that was a lot of inner work to have that safety within myself, to say it's okay that I ask this, and there are no stupid questions. It's just, you know, the ones that aren't asked are the ones we'll never know the answers to. But also looking at the world in a more safe way, because my nervous system was really on the defensive before. And it was just like, no, I need to protect myself. I need to protect other people. I need to protect my little brother, you know? And now it's like, okay, life's allowed to happen, because I will also be the first to admit that I was an opportunity stealer, like, for a lot of people. And I think a lot of us do that as like older sisters, or the parentified child, or the first gen fixer of the family, right? It's like, okay, you're going to struggle through that, so let me just do it. I'll just do it. And you do that enough times, and you're essentially taking away these opportunities from the people that we love to learn how to do things outside of your presence. You know, there will be discomfort, but also, you know, there's discomfort on all ends, right? You're like, I don't want to see them struggle through this, but also at the same time, you're having to add more to your plate when you don't need to. They're allowed to also experience life.
Yeah. Well, I've tied it sometimes to like a kind of a skewed vision or version of love, where it's like, oh, well, if I love you, then I need to step in. If I love you, I need to do these things. But I think maybe that's a good opportunity to also talk about like how that's also an example of inner child healing, right? Because don't we sometimes, like, if we felt powerless growing up, then we see others as powerless. And so we're trying to protect, even though they could be experiencing, like you said, life. Like, there's certain things that they should be experiencing without our protection of it, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that it's not, because I've seen people respond in both ways. And you know, if we don't do the inner work, it catches up with us on either end, you know? So there are also some people who say, I struggled, so you got to struggle. And
mm-hmm.
that sits so like in my spirit. I hear you.
Yeah.
I see the struggle. I do, but it's just not what I subscribe to. But also
right.
a lot of the people who say that are in pain.
Yeah.
And so I see the inner child in you, and I see like let's talk about that, because we don't wake up and want to feel that way. Nobody wakes up and they're like, ooh, I want to see everybody hurt like I hurt. That's speaking from a really pained space.
I think the pattern that I see is like the type of like person that I was talking about is a child to parents that think like that. So like, I suffered, so you suffer. And so then the child becomes, I didn't like suffering, so I don't want you to suffer, you know? So it's kind of like, but both, like you said, are two ends of a similar wound, right? Or it's like inner child wounds.
They come out in both ways. So it's like, it's that one and the other one. And then the middle is just like, oh my gosh, we just got to figure things out, because I'm on both sides, right? But that's where anchoring yourself within yourself is really helpful in doing that inner work, to be like, okay, what do I need? And it's really scary to ask what you need when your whole life you've been taught to ask what everybody else needs, because it feels like, oh no, I'm selfish. Oh no, like I'm not being a good daughter. I'm not being a good sister. When I would say that loving others is loving yourself. And it sounds weird, I know, but I think about it in the context of, I love my family so much. I want to take care of myself, so that I also show up as the best version of myself for them.
Yeah.
Inner child work or inner healing work in general doesn't always start from this idea of like, I love myself, or I really want something better for myself. Start from where you need to. If you need to start from the outside for an outside inspiration, do it. If you're saying, I want to be the best version of myself because I care about my siblings and I want to be here, I want to be around, then you can start there, and you're like, okay, that's my why, that's my inspo. And the hope is that as you do this work, the inspiration then gets to come back inside. As you build this relationship, you're essentially dating yourself. You're getting to know yourself after years of essentially like flaking out on yourself, right? It's like, if we had a friend like that, can you imagine? I think we've all had like people who are just flaky. They're not bad people, but when you make like plans and they're last minute, oh hey, sorry, I can't make it, something came up, okay, and then this happens again, you're like, all right, the third time it happens, you're like, I didn't even leave the house, right? Can you imagine like all of the years that we've been alive, and when we do that for other people, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm gonna get up tomorrow, I'm gonna make myself breakfast because I feel better when I have breakfast. And then I wake up and maybe I get a call from somebody else. Hey, I need you to go do this. And instead of asking questions or setting a boundary, you're like, okay, yeah, for sure, I'm there. Right? Even though this also might not have been an emergency. So I'm saying not emergencies, but sometimes we don't think to ask that question. Our first thing to do is in our minds is, I need to serve you. I need to show up for you. But when I show up for these other people, I'm self-abandoning. And I'm flaking out on myself.
Yeah, it's a like commitment to self. I like that you said it's kind of like dating yourself. Do you think your approach then, like when you were going through this, it was more through seeing it as like your nervous system and understanding it that way? Or was there a point in time where you like allowed yourself to sit and be like, can I talk to my inner child? And like, how did that feel for you? Was that something you did for yourself?
I don't think I had that language until like after. Yeah,
okay.
I think I just sort of jumped into it. I wish I could say it was beautiful. This is my 10-step way. It was messy is what it is. It was all trial and error. Like, oh, I'm going to try doing this. I'm going to try that. And I think really exploring what relationships felt safe for me, and also which relationships were examples to me. And so seeing like, oh, I like how this friend is okay with asking reflective questions, right? Or I like how this friend, they do this. Okay, so I'm like building my own toolbox with things that I admire and that are safe for me. And then with the advice from my mentor, who was like, just go have fun doing music, like do this songwriting contest or go to that fun dance class. And I'm like, okay, sure. I will do that. Let's see what happens. And through those experiences is where we get to create new pathways in our brain. And the opposite of trauma is like the way that we get there, like to the opposite of trauma is play. Like your brain can learn so much faster through play. And I was fortunate to, like I said, beginning of my career, I was doing like children's work. And so I knew the importance of play and how powerful play was. So that was my instruction. That's what I was going for. I was like, I don't have play in my life because it's always been focused. Or when I was playing, and I put quotes around that, it was for the purpose of doing something else. Oh, this person wants to spend time. Okay, we're going to go do this thing. But I couldn't actually like be present in this. And that's a lot of like the work that I get to do now, which is I work with a lot of successful first gen people. There's never a doubt, because first gen also we're putting in that work, and I'm seeing like just so many amazing people. I feel so fortunate with the people I get to work with. And the part where I get to like work with people is I see you doing all these amazing things. And the next question is, are you present and enjoying the fruits of your labor? Or are you constantly somewhere else in your brain or in your body? And so play allows us to sort of work our nervous system a little bit and to also work in presence. But it does take practice.
I love that concept. So play is also important as adults. As much as it's important for kids, it's just as important for adults.
Yes. Kids need to work, eat, sleep, play. Adults need to work, eat, sleep, play. And you know what? Children need nurturing, and so do adults. Just because you get older doesn't mean you need less. You actually probably need a little bit more, because now your brain is fully developed and you see a lot more. So really working in that nurturing and play where you can. It might not look the same. Maybe your play isn't doing hopscotch outside. Maybe it's going to the Zumba class. Maybe it is doing a paint night with your friends. Maybe it's sketching at home, whatever it is. But something where you are allowing yourself to do something for the joy of it, as opposed to having productivity tied to it or that perfection.
I'm also like recovering people pleaser, overachiever, right?
Oh, hey there.
Yeah. And so like I've heard things like, oh, I set out this goal of, oh, well then if I'm going to play, I have to do it every single week, like for at least an hour. So boom, perfectionism, right?
Yeah.
Or like if it's play, can it be productive? Like, cause then I feel guilty if it's not. No, then that's not play. Or what I've noticed too is people will do the thing, but they will bring all their problems to the conversation. So hay que decir like paint night. Estás chismeando de all of your problems, your work dynamics. So I think like, I don't know if you think actually that's fine, or if it's not supposed to be that way, but sometimes I've seen it, I've interpreted it as like, it's important to allow yourself to put those things down, and like bring your, like you said, your presence and your full self to the table. But yeah, sometimes I've seen that with people in my circle, where it's like, even though we're doing something that could maybe create new neural pathways, they're like reverting back to the old stuff, And
I think that's just where everybody's own internal needs come in, because you're going to have a different like menu of self-care than somebody else. And for some people, the chismeando hour is what replenishes them. And they're just like, I am ready to go a whole nother week. This fueled me. Other people, no, they can't do that. They said, oh my gosh, that drained everything in me. And now I need to go and sit in my car before I actually go inside the house because
I'm
so
alone.
Yeah. And then you feel like you still got to do something else. But that's just the recognition of like, okay, I did this for my social connection, which social connections are so healing. But also we do recognize where some people feel safe and some people are a little bit more, and that's where I think boundaries come in, to recognize, where are my emotional boundaries? Where are my time boundaries? Am I honoring them myself? Because that's first our job to uphold them, because everybody's so different. Maybe I have a certain amount of time that I can spend with a certain family member alone. And I'm like, ooh, like at around an hour and a half, like I'm tapped out. And I could love them with my whole heart, but also it's just like, there's just a lot. As opposed to somebody else, maybe my younger brother, who's like, oh yeah, I could be with them all day. It doesn't bother me. Like, but also, different life experiences, right? So it's just different for everybody. And that's where getting to know you, dating you, and recognizing, oh, okay, like you've learned that an hour is your limit doing this sort of activity. And it doesn't mean you don't like it. It just means your menu looks different, and that's okay. And that's really hard in a lot of first gen family, or like first gen people in their families. I know from personal experience, the way that my mom functions is not the way that I function. And that's been difficult at times, because I'm like, you know what? I need to go and rest, and then I'll come back and do this. Right. And in her world, it's like, no, go, 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 go. And so recognizing the way you work is different from the way I work. It doesn't make anyone wrong. It doesn't make anyone right. It just means we have different needs, and we're honoring them in different ways. The thing is still getting done, but we're taking our time and getting to learn that.
Yeah. I like to repeat, like, what I do is not meant to like offend you or be a reflection of what you're not doing or are doing, like it's just my pace, my way of doing it. Cause I think at first it was seen as like, it was taken personally, and so I've had to ease that, where it's just like, no, I promise you, like, this is not about you, it's about me. And that has been helpful in my relationships, where I think at first it's like you're in defensive mode. Oh, well, they don't get me, so like they're just not trying to understand me. And now I've understood over communicating sometimes helps too, and it could create an easier flow in relationships. It's not always about like, oh, I spoke my truth and they didn't get it.
You also get to see that there are some people who are committed to misunderstanding you. And that's just an unfortunate truth, that they're not in a space. And I'm not going to say like they'll never be in a space, but they're not in a space to receive that information. They do not want to be educated. And there's grief there, but also it's not your job and I just heard this quote this week of, it is not your job to rescue everyone from their discomfort. And that's hard. It's hard to put the cape down. It really is. And sometimes, I know what it is to feel like, okay, if I explain this enough, you'll understand it. And I'll feel better. But if this person also isn't in the space to be having this conversation, then I'm also spending all of my energy, which I probably need to be pouring into myself or into the other spaces that are ready to receive this. Now, this isn't me saying like, don't explain anything to them. No, explain what you feel comfortable with. And then if people want to know more, they're allowed to ask more. But allowing that space, which is uncomfortable, I understand. It's so uncomfortable. You're like, but what if they don't ask me? Okay, then they don't ask. And they're going to have an opinion on me either way this goes. And there's nothing I can do about that. Your opinion of me is not my responsibility.
Yeah. Otherwise we can get in that loop of like trying to get them to get you, and and then that can be unproductive sometimes, like you're saying.
And is that who you want to be? Right? Because sometimes we find ourselves performing to like, I need this person's approval. But then when we actually look at our boundaries and we see, where do you fall in like my own life? You're like, oh, you're not actually a person that is in my close circles where I would want your consejos, or I would want certain things, or that I find you as a safe space. And so recognizing that with yourself and be like, that's where you, again, I talk about coming back to yourself, coming back to what grounds you, coming back to the connections that ground you. We're like, I am a good person. I know I'm a good person. I know I have good intentions, and not everybody will see that. But all I can do is, say what I can and do what's best so that I can keep going, because that's what we got to do.
Yeah. Focus on our healing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. This was such a good conversation. And I think like it's so present in a lot of healing journeys, like learning about yourself, rewiring your nervous system, thinking about the past, all of the things, there's so many layers to it, like you said. And I think like we've been talking about on the podcast just throughout different episodes of that like domino effect that starts to happen once you start to focus on yourself and you're like open to learning about you and facing whatever hurts. Like it's just kind of like you're unlocking different levels. And I think I appreciate that you brought so much of that like to the table. And I do want to ask you about like resources and just different things that maybe you use throughout your journey. But before that, I would love if you could just share where people can find you and a little bit about your work in case those tuning in would like to work with you.
Oh, okay. Well, I am Victoria Cortez. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I am a therapist in California. So I offer virtual therapy for those who are residing in California. I'm also a speaker. So I do speaking engagements. I also hold workshops. And I am a coach for those who are needing a little bit more accountability and support on their boundaries and wellness journey. And yeah, so that's me. And you can find me on firstgenfeeler.com, or you can find me on Instagram or TikTok at firstgenfeeler. On both of those, that's the handle. But yeah, I work with First Gen. I created First Gen Feeler, and I created the definition for it, which is one who is part of the first generation in their family to actively pursue their healing, feel their emotions, and or break unhealthy patterns that have been passed down for generations. So, if you're the first in your family who's diving into this work, it can feel lonely, it can feel confusing, and it can feel like, I don't even know where to start. And so I tell you, you are welcome here, and let's get to work.
Yay! Yes, I love that. First Gen Feeler, and that you created your own definition. I was like, okay. Like creating your own town of First Gen Feelers.
Thank you. I was really excited about it. I also sell sweatshirts.
Oh, you do?
Sometimes a saddie, always a baddie, because my First Gen Feelers are baddies. Yes, they are.
Yes. So I love to ask a little bit about just resources or things that you use in your journey in case people are resonating and they're like, oh, I want to check out some of the stuff. So my first question is, what is your favorite healing or mindful tool?
My favorite tool is probably journaling. It's journaling because everything is stuck up here. And I got to find a way to get it out. And sometimes it's not even the thing that I think it is. It's something that is poured out after I journal.
Yes. I think a lot of people resist journaling. I don't know if you've experienced that, but I always recommend it. And like people resist it, but I'm like, there's so much magic in journaling. Okay. What is a habit that you do for yourself every day?
Every day. I make myself something warm to drink. That is something that is loving for myself, whether it's cocoa, whether it's tea. If you're on my social media, you'll see I'll have my mugs. I'll always have some sort of tea. It's a form of self-love, because when I think of like loving things that people do for one another, it's like I always think of like, oh, I brought you a warm cup of something. And so I get to do that for myself.
What is a favorite quote or advice that you refer back to?
Oh my gosh. Okay. My favorite quote. So this one is like super just like inspirational for me, especially when I think about like the time where the waterfall comes down, So it's, for a seed to achieve its greatest expression, it must come completely undone. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes. To someone who doesn't understand growth, it would look like complete destruction. and that's by Cynthia Acelli. And so I just love the visualization of it. And I love how, growth is messy and it might look messy to other people. It might look messy to yourself, but that's also where the most beautiful change happens.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. The last question is a feel good or powerful book or movie.
That's probably going to be like personal, like just thinking about like good times with my siblings when I was younger. And so a feel good movie, then we watch it every year too many times, is The Grinch with Jim Carrey. We quote all of it. So that's where, my husband married into that. He's just like, oh my gosh, you guys really know the whole movie. We're like, it got us through good times.
The Grinch and Christmas is coming up. So perfect. Oh, all right. Well, the last thing is I like to ask if you have a message for first gens tuning in.
I think it's more of like an affirmation to remember along this journey. It makes sense that this is hard. I've never done this before. I'm still learning, and that's okay.
Thank you so much. Oh, well, yes. Thank you so much for the work that you do, for the light that you shine on your social media.
Likewise. I just feel, I was chatting with you before, but I know the love and hard work that goes into editing podcasts and making the time and having the ideas. And so I'm so grateful to you for making the space to shine so many lights as well as your own, and for your vulnerability. It's not easy, and it's very brave, and you're doing it. You're doing it.
Thank you so much.